is our strength.
Our diversity is our strength.
Our diversity is our strength.
Morning. Today is Tuesday, July 9th, 2019. Hope everyone had a safe holiday and a good holiday. This is a regular meeting of the Los Angeles Board of Police Commissioners. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Good morning. Let the record reflect Commissioners Sobroff, Figueroa Villa, and Goldsmith are present, and we have a quorum.
Okay. We have 6 consent agenda items this morning. Do we have any commissioner comments on any of the consent agenda items? Do we have any any of the consent agenda items that do not have any public comment?
No, sir.
Okay, so let's start with 1A.
And please let the record reflect Commissioner Decker is now present. We have Mr. Herman on all items, 1A through F, and that's all, sir,
That's the only speaker on all the items?
on all the items.
Okay, Mr. Herman?
Mr. President, while Mr. Herman is walking forward, the department has requested that item 2B as in boy be removed from the agenda.
Okay.
It'll come back at a later date.
Okay.
And
Have we
please let the record
Have we
reflect
established the
Commissioner.
date for the comeback? Be next week? Or the week
It will be in
after?
the next couple of weeks.
Okay,
It'll be a revised report.
thank you,
And
sir.
please let the record reflect Commissioner Bonner is now present.
Okay, we're all here. Okay, this is item number 1A. Go ahead. Why don't you get on topic?
Asshole. Thank you. So, regarding 0414234475 BPR Treasury, regarding Section 5.467 ETSEQ BPC number 19-0174. Well, board action, no recommendation as usual, because we heard that the Northridge Fashion Center has gave a substantial amount of monies, like $4,000, regarding how to fuck a Devonshire area cadet.
Off topic.
Well, this is dealing with the cadet program, sir. It's dealing with the cadet program regarding Northridge Fashion Center, who subjected the so-called department with a funded $4,000 check April 9th, 2019. Off topic. However, if you wish to remain anonymous, you may call 818-832-0633.
Let's go to item number
As
1B.
for Jeffrey Johnson, I got 28
No, you
seconds.
don't.
President, he's off topic.
so
Joseph.
off topic. Okay, now we're on 1B. 1B.
All right, the bitch wants me on B. Still off topic on B. What a bitch. Primary America Credit Union, off topic. Check number 1096, off topic, for the amount of $150.
Mr. President.
This is regarding
This has
the
nothing
area
to-
cadet post as set forth. Department's fucking report dated fucking June 27 for the 2019 relative monetary bitch donation totaling $400, assholes, from Canoga Park Elks Lodge. Did I get it right? Off topic. To utilize for food and recreational activities like fucking cadets.
Mr. President, the speaker's off topic again.
Got a minute
Not
and 15
repetitive.
seconds
If
as you
you
rudely
go into that
interrupt me.
once more, I'm going to ask you to leave.
Pardon
the meeting.
me?
I'm going to ask you to leave the meeting.
I got 1 minute.
Stay
What
on
time
topic.
am I?
No, you don't. You're on number 1C. Go ahead on 1C.
On C now. C for cunts. Union
It's off
Bank.
topic,
Topic.
Mr. President.
St. Nicholas Greek Orthodox Church. For the record, Greek Orthodox Church. Mind you, giving $1,500, again for the record, St. Nicholas GREEK ORTHODOX Church. The same pedophiles who donate money
President, he's
to
off
save
topic
their
again.
ass.
Let's go to number 1D,
post
please.
set forth. Pardon
1D,
me?
set the clock for 1D, please.
Is it on? You said 1D, right? Mr. Chair? Thank you, sir. D for dick. The donor will not and should not receive any but all preferential treatment. What is preferential treatment to some of you? Do you understand that? Preferential treatment? What about an endorsement? Who the fuck accepts $1,750 from the Century City Mall LLC? Another conflict of interest, a part of a recommendation, monetary donations. Why are we accepting bribery money?
Mr. President, he's off topic again.
That
Let's go to
should
number.
not
You can
reflect
reset the clock for
preferential
1E,
treatment.
please.
What number now, asshole?
1F, sir.
Thank you.
No, I think it's is E, or did he have
Get
a
on
clock?
E.
Yes, I'm sorry.
I finished with D for dummy. Now I'm on E for idiot. So, department's report dated June 27th, off topic 2019, valued at $12,000 for MTD Kitchen. INC. DBA replaced damaged old carpet like we did at City Hall. Pulgas. You may contact the official correspondence review regarding Frank Avila, whose badge number is 31881 for the record, asshole. I'm on
President,
topic.
he's off topic.
West Valley
Let's go to
area
item
set
number.
forth.
Let's reset the clock for item number 1.
A minute and 58 seconds. I fucking
1F,
can't even
please.
get on my topic, huh? Now regarding Michael Goldberg, which is regarding 2 fucked up 32-inch monitors regarding your coaxial cable, asshole. Am I still on topic? So, Joanna, Susan, no apologies for delays. I do know, and I know when it costs a replacement monitor. However, the police commission requires a dollar cost. Why the fuck didn't they submit the cost in the beginning so those 700 missing fucking dollars would be paid to the Mid-Valley Community Police Council in Van Nuys? Dumb fucking boosters. On topic, asshole. So, you see, the scope of these problems is in regards to how, again, deferential treatment is spearheaded by this commission. When you cannot reflect on your so-called, your total cost. What don't you understand about cost? When you're going to pay for a business to do something for you, you submit a receipt. The receipt should reflect a time and place, just like I would say for the record, 818-374-9409.
Okay,
Who's the asshole that keeps interrupting?
No, you have no time left. Okay, let's. We have a motion for approval of items, all the consent calendar items, 1A through 1F. All in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, let's go to item number 2A. This is the department's report relative to the missing and found persons investigation reports audit. Do we have any? Does any commissioner want to hear a report, or have we read the report and want to go right to questions?
I'd like to go right to questions.
Okay, we're going to go right to questions on this. Good morning, guys.
Morning.
If you could
Commissioner,
introduce-
go ahead.
If you could introduce yourselves, please.
Certainly. Jeffrey Phillips, Commanding Officer of Audit Division.
Bob Arcos from the Office of Operations.
Sergio Sais, Audit Division.
Good morning, and thank you for the report. I do consider this very important, obviously, because it deals with missing persons, and being as thoughtful and as efficient in the reporting structure is clearly important in order to assist families who are missing loved ones. My questions I'd like to focus on, if I could, to the department and ask for a brief summary of what the department the efforts the department will be undertaking in order to improve particularly those areas that it did not achieve particularly good scores in complying. And I'm particularly concerned about getting the information about missing persons into the database and ensuring that it's in that national database to help ensure we do everything we can to find those individuals who are missing. So, Chief, I leave it to you.
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner. And again, not very well in several areas of there. They're very concerning to us all. And the actions that are going forward, again, are listed in here in our report back. Will include the recirculating and post the Office of Operations notice for missing persons investigation report and documentation, and direct our juvenile detectives to again perform roll call training regarding the notice.
Chief, could you move the microphone a little bit closer?
Yeah.
Thank you.
How is that? Better? Okay. And then we'll direct all areas to use the most recent forms, which again was a failure on our part, again, in removing some of these older forms that have been revised and updated, and mandate that the NCIC printout be made part of the missing and found person investigation report, which again was also identified in the audit that this report may have been pulled but was not attached to the report during the inspection. Also, in meeting with the Chief of Detectives, we'll review the the Detective Operations Manual, and the Office of Operations will direct all areas to comply with the 314 requirement. This is also being done, Commissioner, in the CompStat inspections. We are the Detective Bureau aspect of the review on CompStat is looking at overdues on the 30-day missing days, 60-day missing, 90-day missing, and we'll again refocus our efforts on that specifically into several of the areas in the bureaus that had significant failures in the inspection. And lastly, we're going to go back and look at this within 60 days, especially within South Bureau and two areas in particular in Southeast and 77th, who had significant non-compliance in these areas that were overall missed in this audit report.
Thank you, Chief. And I have been to CompStat, and I've seen the efforts being made there. A few follow-up questions, however. I'm a little bit confused on how a form that is, according to the report, deactivated is still being used. Is it not automated, or is it a hand copy form?
Yeah, it is automated, and I think just believe that that we may still have some that are lingering around the station that officers are just picking up out of the report writing rooms or in the offices of records. So again, we'll have to take a look at that. But those forms are automated on the land system for the officers to pull and to complete those.
But there are hard copies in the stations. Is that why they're being used?
There could be. It's something we'll have to go back out and look at. I mean, unfortunately, it's a lot of forms in the department have been revised and obsolete and deleted, but we still continue to find them still lying around in these report writing rooms.
But in terms of the automated form, it's just the new form that's online?
Yes, and they should be using that one, yes.
Okay. With respect to page 11 of the report and the 22% of investigative reports being completed in 30 days, could you address that specifically? Because that seems something that the department should be able to address fairly quickly.
I think in the Audit Division's inspection of that aspect of the inspection, Commissioner, there was a difference in articulation or understanding of the Detective Operations Manual and the Juvenile Procedures Manual, which I've spoken to Chief Frank this morning about, that he's clearly identified that he's going to ask the Detective Bureau to clarify that and be more specific in the direction of the appropriate juvenile manual to follow on this. So I think that's what's kind of, it's not an excuse, still should be able to catch that. 30 days is 30 days, but I think that will help clarify, at least for the roll call training aspect, and then the re-inspection of the 30-day follow-ups that are required.
And is that something that can be added to CompStat as well, the reports being done in a timely manner, not just the status of the missing persons?
Yes, Commissioner. I think that's, again, where we have the opportunity right away to get some feedback exactly on our compliance. Our next CompStat meeting is tomorrow, and then we have another one in South Bureau the following week. So we will be able to take a look at that to see or check on our compliance.
All right, thank you, Chief. Those are my questions on this.
Commissioner Bonner? Okay. Any other questions? Okay, do we have any public comments on the, on item number 2A?
Yes, sir, we have two. We have Mr. Herman and Wayne Spindler.
You had two comments on this?
Yes, Mr. Herman and Wayne Spindler.
Okay.
2A.
Mr. T. Fink, there's a question about why there's none of the reports in the back. Is that the question? I think. Yeah.
I don't know. I'll find out. It's not a requirement to be in the back of the room. The reports have been posted online since last Friday. They're available in our office as required prior to the meeting. In the back of the room is a convenience. I will find out why they're not in the back of the room.
Go ahead.
Shut the fuck up.
Wait, I can't hear Mr. Herman.
I can't be heard if there's if I
Please.
I can't.
Please,
I can't.
don't disrupt
No,
the meeting.
No,
I'm
let them
trying to
keep
listen to
saying
Mr.
more.
Herman.
Come on, I want
Mr. Herman.
I like audiences, sir. You forgot to start the time, jackass.
I know. Please start the time.
So what it says here is that the Assistant Chief Robert Arcos, for the record is spelled Arcos, on item 2A said the department report for June 19, 2019 relative to missing missing funds, persons investigations. Well, I was reading that stupid fucking book back there that had all this information about the reports, and it indicates that some of your officers forgot to put the fucking date and time. Now, once you do that, you commit perjury because there's nothing to find about the regards of a missing person. So you might as well just dig another fucking hole and put another body under there so it could disappear. It's the same way you try to do Mr. Wayne Spindler up in Encino when you had the police put the guns at his head. Well, this is regarding missing persons. And missing persons are people of interest to me because under AD number 18-009, as set forth for what the? Oh, yeah. PB, oh, the asshole's back. Oh, PBC number 190173. Recommendations for board action is to tell that stupid puppet, Mr. T. Fink, to shut the fuck up.
Mr. President, for the public's information, the binder is in the back. All of the reports for today's meeting are there. There are some extra copies of item 2C. That is not required, however, that we knew that item would be of significant interest, so we made extra copies. We are complying with the Brown Act by having a copy of the agenda item in the back of the room. We are not required to make multiple copies of every item.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. So.
Yeah, so I read your report, Mr. T. Fink. This morning, when I was on my laptop.
You did?
Yes, while I was out taking a fucking shit, I read your report. And I have to say, it is some of the finest fucking bullshit I've ever seen. You should really read it. It's excellent. Arcos is the king. Well, actually, maybe the queen of bullshit. I don't know. But one thing I know is that there's a lot of missing things in your missing report. For example, where is the printed version? In a budget that's 51% of the city's budget, you can't provide some little paper copies in the back for puppets to read? What happens if you don't have a laptop? What happens if you don't have internet? What happens if you're running from the police and you read the paper copies? You don't get shit. But
Mr.
what
President,
I
he's
like
not
to
speaking
do,
to the item. The item
Yes, I
before you
am.
is an audit.
No,
Mr.
it's
Spindler,
I'm
please go on.
yes, I'm talking
Please go
to
on
the-
topic.
Stay on the fucking topic.
Okay. Yeah, so now, you know, I'm trying to read these. I tried to read your audit. Audits by you people are about as honest as shit on the back of a goat's ass. Yes. So
You know what?
I do not-
Hold on for a second. I'm going to give you 5 more seconds, okay? But do your children in the back of the room?
Do you hear
Do you
children?
have to use such disgusting, despicable language? And why don't you keep quiet, or we'll call a recess, okay? Buddy? Right now, we'll call a recess, pal. Go ahead, Spindler. Take your time back. Sir, please don't disrupt Mr. Spindler.
Beneath that facade, you're a criminal.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mr. Spindler.
Yeah, so what he's
You
saying
want to
is...
move on or not?
Well, yeah, just try to watch your language.
Yes, okay. I'll watch my fucking language. Now, back to the topic. As I was fucking saying about your fucking bullshit audit, I refute almost every statistic. Now, finally, remember something. The FBI is watching, so do what Eileen Decker did and do...
Okay, motion for approval of item number 2A, please.
So moved.
Do we have a second? All in favor? Aye. Okay, we're going to go to item number 2C. This is the department's report relative to the Small Unmanned Aerial Systems Pilot Program and the extension thereof. Morning, sir. Okay. It's cute, but it's disruptive, so if we don't stop it, we'll just do this privately.
Chief, Commissioners, good morning. I'm Deputy Chief Horace Frank. I'm the commanding officer of the Department's Counterterrorism and Special Operations Bureau, and I'll let my...
Lieutenant Charles Springer, Air Support Division.
And Lieutenant Chester McMillian, Metropolitan Division, Special Weapons and Tactics.
Morning. Go ahead. Do you want to go right to questions on this, or do you want to hear the presentation?
Obviously, this,
yes,
is
Chief.
This is an item of significant public interest, as well as a pilot effort that this commission was substantially involved in understanding how the guidelines would be crafted, what rights and protections would be protected, and how this tool, this emerging technology, could be used to in our efforts for SWAT and our Hazardous Materials Unit and Bomb Squad to resolve dangerous and highly volatile situations. We're proud of the work in the last year as far as this pilot and exploring how these types of devices can be used to help resolve situations safely. We believe that the reporting that's been done on this and the limited instances in which we've actually utilized this tool has shown our commitment to protecting the privacy and constitutional rights of all involved, while at the same time ensuring the safety, whenever possible, of our SWAT officers and other police officers when they're engaged in some high risk and very dangerous types of scenarios that they're trying to bring to a safe resolution. The report, I believe, speaks to all these issues, and as well as our proposal that this be made a permanent part of our tool set, and that we continue to abide by the guidelines and the requirements of this program, including the immediate notification up through the chain of command, and including notification to the Board of Police Commissioners Subcommittee on this issue, as well as an annual report that would detail each deployment, the transparency of that report so the public can watch and observe and ensure that we are living up to our commitments here, I think is critical as well. And certainly the Chief Frank and his team here can answer particular details that you may have as far as further questions.
Thank you, Chief. Questions, Commissioners?
Hey, good morning. I'm going to ask a few questions about the program and the guidelines themselves, but I wanted to first clear a few questions about the technology, if I could. And I presume you have the report there in front of you, so if I refer to some page numbers, you can follow there. So I'm starting really on page 6 in the discussion of the technology and some of the updates. And on the first bullet item there, it says you're awaiting approval of the donated software, and so if you can speak a little bit about where that donation is coming from, and just what that is about, and in particular also, is it really just an internal management kind of software, or is it something that is inherent to SUAS. Or, yeah.
Commissioner, on the software specifically, it's from Measure Corporation. It's a company called Measure. And they
Measure
work
Aerial.
closely with one of our sergeants, Tony DiMolina, who's one of the department SMEs for this program. And they approached him and offered to provide that software for us.
And can you just, are we accepting it simply because it was offered to us, or could you just talk a little bit more
no,
about
it's the software is fairly comprehensive. It allows us to track the deployments and flights a lot more accurately than they are being, or a lot more efficiently than they are being tracked currently. Currently, it's being done through Sergeant DiMolina's personal computer program itself. So this is formalizing more formalizing the accountability and the tracking of the flights and deployments.
And who's approving that? It says you're awaiting the approval of the donated software. Who's approving that?
So, Commissioner, that approval process is currently through the process right now. It's already gone through Administrative Services Bureau requesting permission from the Police Commission for the department to accept that. As of last week, we were told that should occur within the next week and a half or 2 weeks. So that should be
it'll come before us.
It will come before the commission.
Look at
Yes,
that
sir.
time as well. So
Yes,
appreciate
sir.
that. In the top of page 7, also there's a reference to DJI. I presume are they the manufacturer or of the equipment?
DJI is the manufacturer of the devices that we're using right now.
And by the way, one small point here on this reference, there's at the end of this bullet, there's a reference to DJI being committed to developing products that will continue to enhance officer public safety. So that strikes me as marketing language probably put forward by this company. So I would just recommend that in the future we be a little more discerning and not try to pick up that kind of, if that's what it is.
That's correct, sir.
We don't need to make that representation on behalf of the vendor. What is the, in terms of the system itself, what is the expected useful life of one of these systems? In other words, I'm trying to figure out, this is under the topic of trying to figure out how often are we going to be updating and what's the cost associated with the technology itself.
Yes, Commissioner, this is emerging technology, so it's very difficult to answer that question. Things are changing almost monthly, so it's very hard to quantify when we'll get to a longer established product.
But for the system that's been in use for the past year, I mean, has it reached the end of its useful life, or are we expecting to continue to use the system?
No, Commissioner, we're still using a lot of the same technology that we had. They're still in use. Like all technology, though, things always get better and better, and we will assess them as they come to ensure that whatever new products do come through, that it fits our needs. If it's something that comes through that we don't think it fits our needs, then we're obviously not going to go after it. Clearly, one of the drawbacks, if you look at it that way, with a lot of the technology right now, is the amount of time that you can leave that you can actually deploy the drone. Right now, we're averaging, I think it's 20 or 22 minutes maximum. With one of the new systems, it can actually go up to 31 minutes. So those are always things that we're constantly looking at. But at some point, I don't think we can definitively say at what point it gets to where we get to that useful lifespan where it says, okay, there are no more technology enhancements.
Let me but make a comparison, say, to the mobile phone where the technology is currently changing. I don't have to buy a new phone every time there's the software update or a capability changes. So I'm trying to understand, as that technology continues to emerge, are we going to be buying a bunch of new phones every time there's a new change, or is it more of a software updates and things that are a little more efficient and economical?
So again, there may, and I'm going to speculate, there may be somewhere down the road where we decide, okay, this particular platform needs to be replaced. And if that happens, we'll certainly assess that. But as of right now, what we're doing is maintaining the same platforms, but at the same time, just upgrading the technology as needed. Because again, there may be times when a piece of technology may come through, an enhancement, that we don't see a need for it. And if that's the case, we're not going to get it. But if there does come through something, for example, the one that we're looking at right now, is the enhancement that allows us to be able to see much better indoors than we currently can with the DJI Spark. That's something that we absolutely need, and that's one of the deficiencies that we noted during during some of our training missions, that the current Spark that we have, which was designed to be used indoors, does not give us the kind of optics indoors as we should have. So those are the things that are currently happening.
What kind of controls would we have in place on this issue, for example, where again I can very easily understand whether it's a software update or something along the lines you mentioned. But if there's a system, for example, and I understand that what's being proposed here in any fundamental way change the capability of the system. It may allow it to be in the air longer or something like that. But on one of the issues that's been of concern here generally, is, for example, the prospect of weaponizing, the system, which I know is not under discussion. Point I'm making is, in the event someone produced a system that had some capability along those lines, are we sure that that we'd have a way of knowing before we ever acquired any such technology?
I can assure you,
part of what
Commissioner,
yeah.
that will not happen.
So, Commissioner, let me weigh in on that as well. So the product evaluation that, as the department looks at tools and technology, there's a product evaluation process. And the recommendation here is that the latest iteration of this SUAS system addresses concerns that we have relative to our experience. We're using the current model. Once it's inside a location, its ability to see itself, give situational awareness, has been improved with this new model. Secondly is the device's ability to light up and use a speaker and communicate with an individual, say it's an individual who's barricaded, to speak through that system is an added enhancement. Next, we've seen this autonomous issue where once the vehicle, which is designed, the current vehicle is designed to operate within a closed building, in a room for instance, what the operators have found is that it loses its GPS signal. And so therefore the craft no longer knows where its exact placement is. And the operators are experiencing difficulty navigating through tight quarters. The new system that, the next iteration, if you will, the version 2.0, takes those challenges into account and provides new sensors and new tools to improve the operation of that in such circumstances. I would envision, as you said, the phone. Today, the department, clearly known, we use two phones, an S8 by Samsung and an iPhone. I don't know the version of the iPhone, but I do know that S9 is the latest iteration. The department hasn't moved to that because we haven't found the features or necessity to. I suspect the same will happen here, that as features are added and they become overly featured, that there'll be instances in which we will stay at our current model. But in each instance, any proposal to change would be closely scrutinized both internally as well as as our recommendation here, be brought before you for added major components that would be, we see as a necessity for this. For instance, if this was to become a cargo carrier in the sense of actually transporting some type and delivering some type of material, then that I would see as something we'd bring back to you. Certainly weaponization, facial recognition, those types of activities we have absolutely an expressed prohibition, and I would see absolutely no appetite with anyone within the organization or by this board for us to add such features.
Yeah, and I think that's the key point is that I would, and I suppose or surmise from what you're saying that is one thing to invest in upgrades to enhance existing capabilities, that, see more clearly, stay in the air longer, those kind of things. But as long as we're clear that there wouldn't be an investment that would materially change the capability of the system, is what I'm saying, without a thorough understanding and review by the commission. Is that a fair assessment?
That is correct,
okay.
sir.
And one question also along those lines, just in terms of the cost of the system, is this an item that is included in the budget, or is there any part? If you can explain if there's any part of the program that's being funded by an outside entity or donations or anything of that nature?
So this item, Commissioner, is not included in the regular department budget. These are all being funded by the Police Foundation.
If the program were made permanent, would there be any intention or any thought about just including it as a regular line item in the budget?
Well, that's a discussion we'll have with the Chief Commissioner. Yes.
Yeah, and Commissioner, yes. The short answer is we often, the foundation has been a resource because of instances in which the department cannot find public funding or the availability of funding is not there. We are currently working on the national level with the UASI, Urban Area
Security
Initiative, for equipment that this may fall within the parameters of. We've seen that for instance, other types of equipment that we've purchased, communication equipment and so forth. And again, that would be a resource. It's public monies from that's garnered to this area, that would be an avenue. But I would certainly, in each of things that become normalized, like vehicles and other tools that we have, we want to seek the public funding whenever possible.
Do we know roughly what is the annual cost?
So I think the new one's about 30
No,
grand.
we have the number.
So
The 30 grand for.
Well, that's initial.
So I'm trying to get an idea. Is it thousands, tens of thousands, millions? What is?
Well, it's not millions; it's tens of thousands. So the new DJI Spark that we're looking at is about somewhere between $20,000 to $25,000. But that obviously is not going to be a continuous annual cost. We do have a report in terms of what the initial layout was, which was about 40-something thousand was the initial layout to get all the devices on board initially.
Okay, and then by the way, to me, I appreciate the comment, Chief, that I don't know as we sit here now whether this should be necessarily on the issue of the budget. I would just note that one advantage of is that, from my opinion, is that we have an opportunity to get further review and input also by the city council, elected officials statewide. I know they are involved with some donations as well, but I think that would be an added advantage of having that conversation at some appropriate time. I wanted to then just to go into a few questions about the guidelines themselves, if we could. One thing that I note that the guidelines, on the document itself is titled as the pilot program. And one broad question was, now if you're proposing to expand this in other areas, can you comment on why there's not a proposal to pilot in these other areas before making it permanent? So talk a little bit about why we should feel comfortable expanding the program in areas where we haven't yet piloted it.
Yes, sir. So, commissioners, basically, the initial pilot that we just completed this year, that was basically the test of the entire process. There's nothing that's going to change currently if we were to add the bomb squad or the hazmat. The system as itself, the policy as itself, already allows us to deploy within those guidelines if it was a hazardous situation or a situation where there's a device. The process already allows us to do so. The difference here is that now we will be adding additional personnel to be able to use the SUAS instead of just having SWAT. Because right now, if we did have a hazardous situation or a device that was at a location, even though it is a hazardous device situation, we would have to call SWAT personnel to operate the devices to address the situation. What this would allow us to do in terms of expanding, for lack of a better term, the program, is that we will train a cadre of bomb technicians, hazardous materials technicians, train them to the standard that we currently have our SWAT personnel trained, so they can operate the devices.
Right.
So everything else will remain the same.
By the way, one of the points I'm making here is that what you just described is precisely what's reflected in the only guidelines that I'm aware are approved by the commission. And so they speak to, we could say, great, do this, but at least we still have a set of guidelines that only authorize this to be done by the SWAT officer, not by the others as you're suggesting. So I'll want to talk a little bit about how we will address that. If you have the guidelines themselves, let me walk through a few questions there if I could.
Yes.
One, there's a reference here in a couple of places to this being ineffective as a de-escalation tool. Is there any example of that, whether in any of the 4 cases where it's deployed, or just where you kind of might make that logical assumption, just kind of paint that picture as to?
Yes, Commissioner. So in the 4, let me get to my page here. In the 4 or the 6.
I think it's 2 of the 6 that had the.
Yeah. There were 6 instances where page 4. This one. Yeah. There were 6 instances where the device was approved, where the technicians and the captain on site asked for approval, and we gave them the approval to deploy the device. There were 6 of those instances. However, only 4 where the device was actually deployed. In each of those 4 instances, for example, the last one going back to June, which was just a couple of weeks ago, and I was at scene for that particular case, it clearly was a de-escalation device. It clearly turned out to be a de-escalation tool because the individual, after hours of this was an individual that had fired shots it was already a shots fired situation. After hours of police officers on scene and the airship trying to get this individual to surrender, that did not happen. SWAT was called out now for a barricaded situation. They're trying to, the CNT, the crisis negotiation team got involved, trying to negotiate with the individual to get out. He did not surrender, and as within seconds or within minutes of deploying the UAS to the entrance of the trailer where this individual was, within minutes of deploying the UAS, within minutes of deploying the UAS, the individual opted to surrender. Clearly, we did not have to use gas, which probably would have been the situation. Clearly, we did not have to move up in a situation and get officers involved in a situation where this individual was also armed. So those are things that precluded us from using gas, prevented us from having to engage a suspect who was armed, and instead he came out unarmed and surrendered, leaving the weapon inside the location. In all the other situations, those are clearly things, whenever we deployed the UAS, that we did not have to do in terms of use of forces, deployment of gas, tangling with an individual, putting officers in harm's way, absolutely.
There was a second case of the four that had a similar, pretty similar de-escalation situation.
Yeah, specifically, let me see, Lee, can you think of it specifically? I can get to it here. The April 7th situation.
Protected the suspect. I mean, he...
Yeah, the April 7th situation, and that's articulated in the report, where again, by using the UAS, it precluded us from that situation going to escalate into where we'd end up having to use gas or get into a physical altercation, so to speak, with the individual. There's also, I can tell you, Commissioners, I think it was last year when we had another situation where, was it last year? Where we had a shooting in Benedict Canyon.
Yes.
Remember that one?
Yeah.
Where we had an individual who was shot at his fiance. She came out, called the police. Because of the location, it was pretty well fortified. If we had the ability to deploy UAS, that ended up being an OIS. If we had the ability to deploy this UAS, chances are we probably would not have ended up in an OIS. And the reason I say that is because we had to get eyes on the individual who had been shooting at his girlfriend before she came out, and was also shooting at the officers. Because of the shrubbery, the layout of the location, there was no way we could have gotten eyes on that individual, and we clearly could not have sent an airship on top, because that would have put the crew in danger. So we had to move in the armored vehicle down the pathway, and that's when the OIS occurred, because he saw them coming. If we were able to deploy a US in that instance, we'd have been able to have eyes on that individual without putting officers in harm's way.
Okay, I mean, I can surmise much of or any number of incidents where that might be the case. Let me just roll on through a few others. I guess the fourth paragraph this is still on page 1. It says the department conducted an extensive review of existing UAS policy, procedures, and legal restrictions. I presume this was done since this document again was presented and approved at the beginning of the pilot. Was there any additional review along these lines since the pilot? So when you started this, as this statement reads, that there was an extensive review of existing policy and procedures and restrictions. Any subsequent review of any policy, procedures, legal restrictions, and thinking in terms of looking at best practices or experiences elsewhere outside the department?
Yes, Commissioner. So we're constantly looking at what it is that we're doing, and in fact, I think that was reflected in the 6 approvals that we gave and our SWAT officers on site.
Chief Frank, why don't you talk about the subject matter expert team that's been established? Who's the point of contact that's charged with not just our internal operations, but monitoring the use of UASs across the country in law enforcement and public safety, and how they monitor the evolution of this, if you will, for potential advancements?
And how they inform the recommendations that are made here, if at all.
So, Lieutenant.
So I'll let Lieutenant Springer talk on a couple of those, but I am also on a commission, I should add, the URC committee, that looks at best practices for all the surrounding area in terms of individuals, including public safety entities, whether it's fire or law enforcement,
Chief Frank,
that are involved.
Please speak into the mic. It's difficult to hear. This room is quite full today.
I'm sorry. So I'll let Lieutenant Springer speak to one regard, but I'm also on a committee, on a URC committee, for the region, for the LA Long Beach region, which is made up of public safety agencies, fire and law enforcement, where they use the US devices. And we're constantly looking at best practices that are being done not just within the region, but around the country. So that's one of the things that we have in place, and I'm on that committee. And I'll let Lieutenant Springer speak to the other aspect.
Commissioner, as mentioned earlier, Sergeant DeMolina, he's one of our SMEs. He actually is a instructor and owns a business that instructs on drones throughout the United States. He spends considerable time speaking at the Airborne Public Safety Association seminars, formerly the Airborne Law Enforcement Agency. So he's our subject matter expert there, and he spends considerable amount of time, as mentioned, nationwide, liaising with different agencies and how they're operating these devices and best practices, et cetera. Probably some room for further evaluation with our sister agencies in FEMA and fire, but primarily we've concentrated on the law enforcement side.
Let's,
Additionally, Commissioner, in addition to the URC committee that I'm on, we have 2 detectives from our bomb squad that are part of a regional task force that's headed by the FBI, and their job is to do just that, to look at all the best practices as it relates to U.S. and counter-U.S. policies and procedures around the entire country, and they were part of that FBI task force.
Before I come back to the question on that, I want to go back just briefly and just note that if I heard you correctly, there's a sergeant somewhere in the system that has a company that does some work in this area. So I just make sure that somebody's got some proper looks and controls. It always makes me nervous when I'm hearing about people on the public payroll who are also making money on the expertise that they're being paid. So I don't know that that's the case. I'm just saying that it's something that I think deserves some particular checks in the system.
We're on side with that, sir.
My question also then, when you reflect on all of what you're noting, would you say is the department a leader, a follower, a trendsetter? Where does the department rely in this area in terms of all these other agencies that are also using similar technology?
Well, Commissioner, I don't want to sound bold, but I think when I've looked at several of the policies around the nation, when I looked at several of the policies around the region, I think we're a lot more. I think we're a lot more committed. I think the oversight that we have is much more than I've seen around other agencies around the country.
Commissioner, we are by no means an early adopter. We are what I would consider in technology a fast follower. As to the adoption of the technology, there's hundreds of agencies, law enforcement agencies across the country that have utilized small unmanned aerial systems for quite some time. I think what Chief Frank does speak to, though, is what the governance of it, the manner in which they're deployed, the restrictions, safeguards, the privacy interests that are protected are, I think, some of the most stringent in the country, and rightfully so. This is a device that has a great deal of controversy in some quarters. In other quarters, people wonder why are you worried about this? This is it's a flying robot. We use robots on these exact circumstances for decades, rather than putting police officers in harm's way on a barricaded suspect, or rather relative to putting a police officer in harm's way with a potential explosive device. We've had land-based remote-controlled robots with cameras and sensors, much as this system. This is aerial. It does create, we recognize that because of the militarization of drones and how it has been used by armed forces, that people quickly can find parallels. And unfortunately, there has been instances in which people in law enforcement have remarked about weaponizing drones.
I promise you that nobody is going to interrupt you when you get your 2 minutes, but you've been interrupting every single person. Please stop. We won't interrupt you when you're speaking. Please don't interrupt them.
You and Chief Frank will interrupt us all
Sir?
by telling us that we're off topic. So bullshit, Steve.
Okay, thank you.
The question I have. Question, Chief, is can you embrace just as a goal to have the department be on the forefront of best practices and
well, of course. I think the balance of this is I want to say that that the last 5 years plus the organization has witnessed the development of UAS as a tool to not just de-escalate and protect our personnel, but also to provide another margin of safety in resolving highly dangerous situations, both whether it be a tactical situation as a barricade or a potential explosive or other hazardous materials. And we've learned over that period of time of the staunch advocacy against such tools. And so we've worked with this commission and will continue to work in a cautious fashion that is transparent, that is outspoken as to how those safeguards and expressed concerns are being addressed. And just a simple conversation today as such as the next evolution, moving to the Spark 2, for lack of a better phrase, drawing substantial concerns, we find across the country that this would be a matter of just a simple upgrade, and they would just adopt it as we would many other product evolutions. Having said that, I don't want to say that we're on a blazing or cutting edge of this, because that's by no means accurate. But we are committed to be cutting edge and to be a leader when it comes to the proper use of this tool, safeguarding the privacy and constitutional rights of all involved, while affording our ability to have enhanced situational awareness and efforts to de-escalate and safely resolve very dangerous situations.
Chief, correct me if
that's where the leadership.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but as before we created the pilot program, we were not a leader. We were not anywhere near as aggressive as many other cities. In fact, our program was much more restrictive. Our pilot program is much more restrictive, right, and the permanent program is much more restrictive than many cities, which has created a lot of the issues that
I try to avoid. I mean, I'd rather the department express some humility in the sense of how we're adopting this technology, and not an arrogance of that we're a leader and pronounce.
And by the way, so that's not what I'm asking for, by the way, in terms of being able to just say we are. I think what I'm asking is to make sure that when you're going out and doing all of the activity that you're describing in terms of being involved in all these groups and so on, is we should embrace it as a goal to continuously improve what we're doing here. So in other words, if somebody else has found a better way to protect somebody's rights, or a better way to I'm going to trust, I have a very high degree of confidence that you have that you're on the money relative to the tactical use of the system, right? But let's make sure that we're also striving to make sure that we learn from others as to how we can have better controls on it as well. And so, and you referenced a couple of times, Chief, really what is another one of my concerns that I wanted to get your reaction to, because the both the report that you submitted and I think the guidelines kind of make the reference to using the system in a way that reflects, concerns for privacy and privacy interest. And what I want to understand is, other than the conclusory kind of statement to that effect, I would like to understand along the lines we're talking. We're just, we've seen a lot of systems used elsewhere. We've seen some other approaches. I think I mentioned to you that I'm aware that I've seen some DOJ guidelines that appear to have a little more meat on the bones in terms of making sure that we don't use these systems to surveil, gatherings and otherwise constitutionally protected activity. And maybe you can explain this to me a little bit, because on the one hand, I appreciate the fact that on its face, the way this is written, that's not a permitted use, right? But can you speak first? I have one question last for you, and then one last question then for the Chief before I turn it over. For you, I'm just asking how are we also then making sure that you have the paper that says one thing, but that the actual use doesn't evolve in some different direction?
Thank you, Commissioner. So, Commissioners, I think the way we ensure for that is that we have a very stringent approval process. When we look at the guidelines and what it is that the officers have to go through, to get approval, it starts at the captain. It starts actually at the lieutenant, SWAT lieutenant, where he makes that decision whether or not he thinks this is the time when it's approved. He has to go to the captain, the on-scene Metropolitan Division captain. Once they agree yes or no that this is a situation where it is needed, they have to then elevate it to a staff officer at the Counterterrorism Special Operations Bureau branch. And it doesn't end there. If the staff officer, who would be a commander in most of the cases, if he or she believes that, yes, I agree, this is a time when it should be deployed and it's consistent with the written guidelines, then that individual elevates it to me at my level. So it's a very stringent process. And at every level, we're looking at, does this fit the guidelines that have been approved by this commission? Now, in terms of the language that you've mentioned, that can we be more specific? I think we can. And should the commission approve this as a permanent process, what we would do is move it from a pilot project to to regularize it within the department operations, and we do that through a special order. And I'd be more than happy, as you and I discussed earlier, to look at that language that we can inject into this to give it a lot more meat.
Just before I close, let me ask the chief along those lines. I think what I'm saying is that you have the current guidelines that, and I, by the way, I'm asking a lot of these questions. I wasn't here when to get the benefit of the review on the front end of this, but I do note again that on their face, it's referenced as the guidelines for the pilot program, which you're now proposing to make permanent. You're also proposing some expanded use, and then we have some additional touch-up. So how would we, short of just giving you some, taking some vote today, how would we take an effort to try to shore up the written guidelines and what I think of as the underlying policy to kind of reflect much of what has been talked about verbally?
So, Commissioners, the report that was provided to you was a report of the one-year pilot program. Its evaluation, how the questions that were to be examined and evaluated, what our experience was with those questions, and our recommendations moving forward. What was also included is the original pilot program deployment guidelines and procedures, which speaks to the background, the definition, the responsibilities, the approval for deployment, the permissible uses, the prohibited uses explicitly, as well as video recordings, documentation, and inspection procedures, status reports, and the time period in which this pilot would go. Should this meet with the approval of this board, that this program be adopted as a permanent program with us, the department would then go back and prepare a special order that would largely follow the program guidelines and procedures, talking about the underlying purpose, the guiding principles, the intended usage, the governance of it, the reporting of it, each of these areas that was well crafted, I believe, in the program guidelines. To the extent of added focus relative to protected activities and privacy interests, that would be part of that document that would then be incorporated into our department manual and memorialized. Today, what you have is a decision to make as to whether this is to become a permanent part of our operations. What the department, upon this approval, would do is come back with you, I would say, in probably 60 to 75 days with the document that would articulate in a special order just how all this governance would be accomplished.
And I would welcome that. Largely, I'm looking at item 7 that this is on page 1 of the report, that recommendations on whether the use should be continued, and if so, any modifications to these guidelines or other policies and procedures that should be considered. And so I've just mentioned a few that I would like to see considered. And am I understanding you correctly, Chief, that they would be reflected in this special order that would then come back
for your approval,
further review by the commission?
For input, and obviously we would work with the subcommittee appointed by the chair, by the president, to ensure that the document is responsive to concerns of this board.
Thank you.
Commissioner Decker?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Just to follow up on the last item, I just want to be clear on what's coming back to the commission. As I understand it from the conversation, in 60 to 75 days, there'll be a presentation of a proposed special order. There'll be the acceptance of the software coming sooner than that. And also, in addition, the board will continue to have oversight functions with respect to the reports on the use of these UAS. Do I have generally the correct overview of what's coming back to the board?
Yes.
Okay.
That is correct.
Anything I left out? Okay.
That's correct. And Commissioner, I would add, though,
When it's your turn to speak.
Just to be clear, I'm talking about what's going to be
speak.
happening. I just want to be clear. I'm talking about what's happening in the future, not what you're proposing. What would happen in the future should the board today vote?
should the board act?
I've warned.
Right.
So this is
Okay.
your last warning now.
So that's the continued oversight function, but I want to ask questions specifically about what's before us today. And I have to say that when I read the report,
Sir,
I'm sorry.
We won't interrupt you, sir. I promise. Don't interrupt the speaker. Okay. So we can. I think that maybe we should. It's hard to continue this meeting with the interruptions. So I think that either we're going to agree to stop the interruptions, or we're going to recess and then just finish the meeting without the disruptors. So it's your choice.
Mr. President, why don't we try to proceed?
Okay.
When I read the report originally, I was under the impression that you were requesting updated hardware. Is it just software that's being updated? The donation of the Measure Aerial Intelligence software, is it just software or is it hardware as well?
This is software right now.
No, there is a new craft.
That's what can you explain what the new craft is and why that is needed in addition to a software update? And how many UAAs in total then will the department be using? Are you taking the old ones out of service? I'm just a little confused about the hardware software issue.
So with regards to the hardware, the new DJI Spark, the initial one that we had, and it's designed to be used indoors. One of the things that we found out during the training is that when you put it in, when you get it inside, the optics and the visuals is not as good indoors as you would have gotten it. So this particular, and I think the chief articulated also, is that we also had an issue with the Wi-Fi connectivity with that particular device, having problems with it, and that the handlers, the operators are losing contact with it. So this particular new device, this 2.0, so to speak, takes care of those particular deficiencies that exist with the current Spark. So that would be the hardware one.
But Lieutenant, Chief, please address how many UASs we have currently in inventory and how this new replacement device would, rather than augment, but would update the use of our inventory. I believe that's the Commission's the Commission's question.
So yes, ma'am. To answer your question, so we have 4 UASs right now. We have the Spark, we have 2 Phantoms, and we have what's called a Matrice 210. The new one, which is the Spark 2.0, is called a Mavic. The Mavic will replace the Spark, and the Mavic is the one that is more suited to fly indoors. It can detect obstacles more readily, and all the other things that the chief has already mentioned. So our fleet will remain at 4. We will decommission the Spark and replace it with the Mavic.
Thank you. That clears it up for me. Thank you. With respect to the use of a radiation detection meter, can you explain what that is, what it's... I understand officers sometimes currently have a device on them that detects radiation, but is that similar type of technology that's being used, or is it completely different?
So there are different technology that our hazmat folks use because of their expertise. And what we talked about in this particular report is that having access to a UAS, what it would allow us to do is if an officer had to go into a location, whether it's to do assuming they're going to do some sort of testing, instead of the officers going in there with these devices to test, then what we can do is mount the tester that the officer would normally take in with him, mount that tester on the UAS and take that UAS into the location to get a reading.
So it's technology that officers are already using.
That is correct.
Just attached to the UAS.
That is correct, Commissioner.
Okay. And I assume that is a safer situation for the officers as well.
It will be, Commissioner.
Okay.
Yes, Commissioner.
Can you, I noted in the report, I'd like to talk, I think I understand the technology aspects now, but can you talk, I'd like to go into more detail about the privacy issues, and I'd like to talk about or hear from you about the training that officers who undergo training to use these devices are given with respect to privacy, because I noted in the report there's, I believe, 171 hours of practice flights, but obviously there's other training that goes in outside of practice flights. I'd like to know the training and advice given to officers in the field using these devices about protecting privacy.
And again, Commissioner, it's not officers in the field, it's basically our SWAT team, and then just that SWAT.
I understand that.
Okay. And I'll let Lieutenant Springer go into the training aspect of it.
All right, just a brief overview. The FAA doesn't require any specific training guidelines. They just require that the public entity have a training system in place. And we do have one that's post-certified now. It involves 3 courses. One is a basic course, 48 hours. The second one is a nighttime flying course, which is 16 hours. And then the third one is what we refer to as a kind of a special operations course, which is 24 hours, and that involves learning how to fly in confined spaces and indoors. Part of the training curriculum includes a documentation that each pilot is served with the guidelines and the policies regarding the deployment of UAS. So they're governed by those, and then there are other direct supervision during each SWAT call-out when one of those UASs is deployed.
And Lieutenant McMillan, can you speak about, on a barricaded suspect situation, what we do as far as search warrants and so forth as to allow that and the investigation of that barricade, which speaks to the privacy concerns of those persons in those structures?
So you're referring to the approval process? So as far as the approval process, it would the tactics are a discussion between myself and our personnel who are actually at the crisis site, and I would have a discussion with my direct commanding officer, which is either Captain Jonathan Tippett or Captain Craig Valenzuela. And then there is always a bureau representative from Counterterror Special Operations Bureau, whether it's a commander or Deputy Chief Frank.
No, Lieutenant, what I'm speaking to is third party, the use of this camera system to capture third party images, in other words, neighbors. The use of this vehicle in a private residence or a location that is not subject to a exigent circumstance, which would allow us to search that without warrant. What is it? Is just this tool, when you conduct a barricaded suspect situation, how are the privacy rights of the individual in that location protected?
So there are very specific deployment criteria, and we're only using it at certain points of a crisis site, not at neighbor sites or other areas where we would be in violation of privacy rights. So it's only on the crisis site, and it's only in areas of the crisis site that are of particular concern. So it's not for overall of the neighborhood, it's not for crowd management or any of those other things that have been such a problem with the issues of privacy. You know, one other thing that I'd like to emphasize is that a fail-safe to our approval process for this is that we can't just spark up a SUAS and fly it without it being known. Every time that fires up, it has a signal of location, date, and time, and that is recorded, and that is also audited by our program manager at Air Support Division. So to just fly an SUAS over anything we desire, whether in training or in a barricade circumstance, it is all recorded every time, and it's an automated system within that device.
Commissioners, if I can also add along the lines of what Lieutenant McMillan is saying and what Chief Moore was asking. So the guideline specifically states on the prohibited uses that an SUAS shall not be deployed or used in violation of the law and Constitution. Unless a lawful exception applies, department personnel shall obtain a search warrant or other lawful process when required under the Fourth Amendment or other provisions of the law. So those things are written in there.
I appreciate all of that. I do think and concur with Commissioner Bonner that should a special order be presented or drafted in the future, we should itemize a little more carefully and document efforts that will be undertaken to protect the privacy interest of individuals uninvolved with the particular law enforcement incident that is being addressed. I'd like to pick up, Chief, a little bit on the search warrant, because I note in the report there's a request to also use the UASs with respect to high-risk search warrant locations. And my question is, will you be asking the courts in those search warrants for the court authority to use the UASs, or will you be incorporating that in any way in the court process? Or are you considering that more exigent circumstances outside the...
So again, if we have a location where we do have the authority, we do have an actual signed search warrant allowed by a judge to access that location. Once we have that search warrant, now when SWAT goes to that location, again, we're not just going to automatically deploy it, but if it fits the criteria outlined here in terms of accessibility by the suspect or the individuals involved, accessibility, officer safety, then we would deploy it. But it won't be, I do not anticipate that we'll be putting in the search warrant the use to a judge to use the UAS. No, Commissioner.
Okay, I'd like to have a follow-up conversation on that topic.
Okay.
And
again, Commissioner, I think as Chief mentioned, is that when we do craft the ultimate document, we will be working very closely with yourself and Commissioner Bonner on the language.
Because I do think it's appropriate in some circumstances for you to have language where you're requesting the court for the approval to be able to use devices of that nature when executing a search warrant, like you would with other types of technology. But we can talk. That's not necessarily an issue for today, but I'd like to front that issue that I think it's something we can talk about in the future. Excuse me, Commissioner Bonner handled a lot of the questions that I had, and I just want to review my notes to be sure that I've covered all the issues that I had.
Well, give her a second to do that. One quick question. To my understanding, does the FAA require or allow this to be used at night? Don't you need to have some waiver of some kind? And does the department have any such waiver? And talk a little bit about the potential nighttime.
Commissioner, we have a waiver both under the COA and the Part 107, so we are legally okay to fly them at night.
And that's a standing waiver, like once it's granted, then it just...
Correct. We have to renew it every, I think, 2 years under the COA. I'd have to check on the 107, but that's correct, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't have anything further.
No, I had two questions, but Commissioner Bonner covered it. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate the very thorough questions from the other commissioners and the review that the subcommittee did with Sandra and Dale. So you've really covered everything, but didn't want my silence to imply lack of intense interest in the details of this, and appreciate in particular the commitment to ongoing transparency and accountability in terms of reporting to the commission and commitment to the various prohibitions, including facial recognition and weaponizing, as you said. So appreciate all that, and thank you for asking and answering all the questions that I had as well.
I agree that there were a lot of good questions, and that we look forward to getting the formal policy, and I think that the subcommittee, I guess, will remain, Commissioner Bonner, on that committee as well. The pilot program was followed to a T. There was no mission creep there was no misuse. There was no misuse. There was nothing but, in fact, out of the incidents, there was not only protection of the officer and the public, but also probably saved the lives of 2 suspects.
You're a damn billionaire. You don't fucking
I think that the concerns of people around the country regarding these were taken into consideration by the department. There has been no mission creep, and I think that with the proper oversight and continuing, that I'm enthusiastic about moving forward with this.
Yeah, you're too compromised. You have too much trust in the LAPD.
Sir, you want to get into it again? I'm going to ask you, please. You can speak when you come up, but if you want to go through the same thing we've gone through 5 weeks before, we'll do it. But you'd be better off, I think everybody else would agree, that we'd like to hear other people. But if you want to just disrupt it, then we can just go ahead and take the vote. Okay, do we have any further commission comments? Do we have any speaker cards on this?
We have 25 cards.
Okay.
The first one is Mr. Herman, Michael Novick, and Jerry Dietrich, Jeremy White, and Kai Utsumi.
Sir, that's your last warning, or I'm going to ask you to leave the meeting again. Okay. It's your last warning, Spindler.
So, enhance the department's ability to protect and serve the public, we're going to utilize SWAT to use tactical deployments. And here's the history behind this, and it's on the record. Dates of January 9th, 2019, Rampart, 77th Division, West Los Angeles, Southeast, targeting racial profiling people in their community. But if you go down to the tactical deployments approved, not deployed, West Valley Olympics, Jews and the LGBT queers, nothing was bothered by them. So you see, when your son's gay and you have the SWAT on your ass, who do you go to? Steve Silveroff. Why? Because, as mentioned, we're rating the need for the use of ferret rounds and hot gas. So you mean to tell me that the motherfucker's not going to fly up in the sky and patrol and drop bombs on you and drop gas on you and spray you with some type of chemical? You treat people the same way the county treats those little fucking niggers of mine in those fucking places called fucking housing for the fucking orphans, foster kids.
Please, don't disrupt the speaker.
So the unarmed aerial system provide invaluable information to decision makers while decreasing the risk to human life. Well, I find that offensive. I find that very offensive when unarmed UAS provide invaluable information to decision making while decreasing the risk of human life. What a goddamn fucking shame. Put that shit up in the sky.
Next speaker.
Michael Novick.
Need to stop talking about mission creep and talk about mission leap. What the chief says here in his report is the drone technology is evolving at an exponential rate, and it's important to take advantage of technological leaps. So that's what you're approving here. In addition to basically, if somebody comes to me and says, yeah, give me authorization to sell you this, and I'll write you up a contract later on, which is what the chief is saying here, in 75 days we'll give you some procedures to control it. That's called buying a pig in a poke. So you're authorizing here the use of these drones also by the Hazardous Materials Unit. My understanding is that Hazardous Materials Unit is called out frequently on Skid Row because of companies in Los Angeles dumping things on Skid Row that need to be inspected. You also say that the HMU and bomb squad are used for what it calls pre-event sweeps at mass gatherings and high-profile events. So therefore, you are authorizing the use of drones at public protests. So I think that you're completely derelict in your duty. I'll point out in the inspection and procedures that you had for the pilot, it says that the video captured pursuant to the drone program shall be subject to the same requirements and restrictions as digital in-car video and body-worn video programs. And I'll point out to you that the LAPD officers disabled the in-car videos repeatedly, and it was never covered. And that in the recent killing of at the 24-Hour Fitness, somehow both body-worn videos fell to the floor and failed to capture the murder. It just happened again in Anaheim, where the police shot and killed a 17-year-old girl, and somehow when the authorities tried to download the video, they had a...
Next speaker, please.
Jerry Dietrich, followed by Jeremy White and Kayut Sumi.
Okay, my name is Jerry Dietrich. I'm with Stop LAPD Spying Coalition. And I've been against these drones forever. But anyhow, my number one reason for being against them is privacy concerns. And Commissioner Decker, you were asking good questions that were not getting answered. I would like to know, because if my next door neighbor is being attacked by these drones, and you come by my yard and videotape me, you're going to get sued. That's going to happen right away. And it's going to happen every time you do these stupid drones. So anyhow, another thing I want to talk about is that mission creep, and how this is not mission creep. Well, mission creep is like, your SWAT guys were originally going to do all this wonderful barricade-only things and everything, and now they do search warrants and everything they want. And it's the same thing with this UAS thing. At first, they did nothing, and now they do search warrants. But one of your recommendations is to recommend the Emergency Services Division and the Hazardous Devices and Materials section be trained and authorized to deploy UAVs, whatever the things are called, those drone things. But anyhow, what next? Every week you're going to come up with somebody else. They should be using them. Why don't we let them use them? And additionally, what you talked about, replacing these 4 Spark guys with these MEVAC things that are supposed to be wonderful, but 2 years from now, you'll be replacing them with something else that's even more wonderful. So I'm just going through your report, and you have here on page 4, 2 of your deployments were for search warrants. One didn't happen, but how do you authorize a search warrant? You say in the guidelines it's going to be some terribly barricaded, wonderful thing to use it for, and a search warrant is not a terribly barricaded, wonderful thing to use it for.
Jeremy White.
Mr. White?
Jeremy White, followed by Kayutsumi.
Wow, you guys are something else. This paperwork here talks about reverence for human life, de-escalation, preservation of life, harm reduction. Since fucking when have you been involved in any of that? It was also shocking to hear that you said you'd been kind of gauging support for this nationally, but as far as I was aware, the local support for this is none. So what, are you just polling cops around the country? Like, who are you asking right now? Because the people of LA have stood up against this, and they have been heard. And you, Soboroff, you fucking joke of a man, you yourself said that you trusted the LAPD so you would go forward with this. So what is your purpose here? What fucking purpose do you serve for the people? Anything at all? Or is it just to rubber stamp the bullshit that these fucking killmongers are doing? What are you doing up here? I'm baffled, and we're hoping for answers, but we come and we never get them, and then you shut us down, and so we interrupt you, because shut the fuck up already.
Kayutsumi, followed by Jamie Garcia, Mariela Saba, and Catalina Duran.
Yeah. My definition of mission creep is pretty soon, in time, the drones will be weaponized and used against peaceful protesters for total control. That's what this drone is doing. In 2017, LAPD's own survey, out of over 1,600 people interviewed, 97 only approved of a drone. The rest was against it. That's 94% on your pilot program against it. And the pilot program is the first drone program. And every successive drone program is part of the pilot program. No matter how much you try to humanize it, it's a destruction of human being. And when the person that's monitoring the drone does not see clearly what's going on the ground, like military bombings that killed millions of people, firebombing, atomic bombing, any kind of bombing, the pilot sees nothing. That's how the drone controller will be under a weaponized system. And Sabharov, you're a hypocrite because you're supposed to be an oversight and you're just part of the LAPD program. So you're a total hypocrite. Yeah, and so anyway, I agree with what the previous speaker said.
So there was, a lot of things that I wanted to talk about, but I think I really need to reframe what is being tried to be pathologized in this room right now. And specifically speaking to the white individuals on the commission, you demand this politeness. You demand that we act, with calmness being in this room. But that comes from a place that you are not affected by these programs. And you need to really absorb that and understand that. And there's plenty of people in this room that are white, that are here in opposition that can explain that to you. And even your own chief, Soboroff, had to tell you to be more humble. And this really, really is because you are not affected by these things. Now, if we want to go back in history, right, with LAPD, because that's a history that white folks tend to forget. Because you are already assuming, Eileen Decker, that this program is approved, and that comes out in your language, which demonstrates that you do not understand what is happening. But let's talk about the battering ram, when that came about, entering into homes, how revolutionary that was. And now we're trying to pretend, right, that this drone is some kind of de-escalation tactic because you have a history of violence. So we anticipate that violence to come. And maybe it won't come in the form of it being weaponized, but it'll come in the form of gathering our data, which your people could not even answer that question. What happens to the data? Because you want to claim that people are not being, people's information is not being absorbed. I saw the license plate number in the last drone deployment on YouTube. So what the hell about that? You can't even answer that. You can't even answer that. So we already know that you're collecting data, and we already know what DJI is doing with Axon. Experimenting in facial recognition technology. So you may claim that you don't want to do that here, but you are partnering with an organization that is doing that. So we know that you approve. You know that. So don't expect politeness here. Don't expect us to be here and be nice. We already said we don't want
Come
this.
back during public comment and finish your comments. Are you finished now? Thank
you. I'm glad I'm grounded and woke, because when I hear you boys talk about your toys, your violent toys, I feel gross, upset, enraged by your desire to harm with more technology, more money, more drones, equals more terror in the community, more deaths by police. I call in the spirits of children murdered by drones in Palestine and Pakistan and Iran, Iraq, and more. In their memory, we call to an end to your business of violence. You're absolutely sick with your own lies. Folks, this is a moment of intervention. I don't want to 20 years from now that we just have drones as something normalized above us, just like the nasty helicopter that terrorizes our communities, black and brown communities. I absolutely have said no. Communities have been saying no. So it does remind me of how sexual violence works when people say no, and no means no, and you still continue the violence. Since 2014, communities have been saying no. In Seattle, they said no, and they, under the table, gifted you 2 drones. And you said, yes, I want that nasty-ass violence. Communities said no, even in your own surveys. People said no, but still, you said yes. So just sit with that grossness that you embody. This is an intervention. We cannot accept drones as something normal. It's not normal, folks. This is an important time to be alive. To say no is really important, to say no right now. And it sucks that you are a rubber stamp board. It sucks that everything that's on here is pre-approved. I wish you could wake up and stop this. I know who you all are working for each other in this department and all the corporations that we say no, we've said no, we say no again. And if you say yes again, you're violating the community.
Speaker, please.
Katharina Duran, followed by Lamikia Castillo, Paula Miner, and Jeremy Tramer.
Los Angeles,
the City of Angels? Will we be known for our empathetic hearts carried on the wings of community? Or instead of the arms of God flying through the air, will it be cold, heartless steel? Drones. Lives being monitored like it's a video game for the player. One drone leads to more drones, leads to armed drones, leads to fear, division, and death. I don't want to live in a Fahrenheit 451 society. We need less technology, more empathy, less surveillance, more conversation, less shiny gadgets, more time-tested traditions of love, healing, and justice. Please open your hearts and see this as a horrible strategy that will cause greater divisions and more fear in this community. Please protect and serve us by not implementing any drone policy. Thank you.
Next speakers after this also.
Lamikia left.
Thank you.
We in Black Lives Matter are also against drones. We participated in the surveys. We've been monitoring the drone program since LAPD received them in 2014. We feel that it will increase surveillance. We also feel that things change, that we cannot trust what LAPD says because things happen. We know that this company is also doing the facial recognition research. We already know how invalid the facial recognition technology is for people of color, especially black people, especially black women. It has been blatantly proven to be inaccurate. So when we talk about the pictures that we're going to take with drones, what are we going to be doing with those if they are being used when it is not an extreme situation? You know, when it's a situation that's kind of a hunch, or when you just think you need to have a drone there, which often happens, and then an excuse is made up later why it had to happen, as occurs with many of our very serious shooting situations. Things just happen, things just get out of control, and then they're excused. So we're saying now it won't be weaponized. We're saying now that it won't be changed to facial recognition, but we don't trust that. Also, we're concerned about the companies being used for these programs. Often, they are Mr. Soberoff's cronies. They get the pilot, the experiment, and then later they get the other contract. There is no competitive bidding with other companies. So we say no because, again, this is another one of the programs that gets approved in this commission and then turns out to be deadly on the street.
The next speaker is Jeremy Tramer, followed by Zach Sherwin, Adam Smith, and Craig Roberts.
So to all the media here today, I want to start by drawing your attention to something Steve Soberoff said in an interview in April, because I know a lot of you haven't been here before. He said, quote, "If somebody asked, 'Are you neutral?' there's no way. I lean towards cops." This is something Steve Soberoff said. So it won't come as a surprise that in the vast majority of cases where the commissioners rule on officer behavior, they find that policy was not violated no matter how egregious it was. But even in the very rare cases that the commission does rule officers out of policy, we have seen Chief Moore ignore these rulings. This commission ruled that multiple officers violated LAPD policy when they recklessly opened fire on Grishario Mack in a crowded mall in April 2018, killing him.
Topic now.
I'm getting there.
Getting on topic.
I'm getting on topic. But Chief Moore has not taken any action against these officers or even recommended that others take action against them. Same with the out-of-policy rulings for the officers who killed Guillermo Perez and Elizabeth Tollison. Chief Moore's predecessor, Charlie Beck, was fucking atrocious, but even he recommended that the officers who killed Brendan Glenn be prosecuted after this commission ruled their behavior out of policy. So if officers violating policy by using guns to kill civilians goes completely ignored by Chief Moore, why would officers violating policy by using drones to kill civilians be treated any differently by Chief Moore, let alone drones violating policy in non-lethal ways? So the LAPD's proposed drone policies are not just garbage, but they're also completely meaningless. Chief Moore, will the LAPD use weaponized drones? No? You're saying on the record in front of this media that the LAPD will not use weaponized drones. Save that footage, hold it to them. He's obviously lying. You'll see soon enough.
Zach Sherwin.
My name is Zach Sherwin. I do not purport to be the expert on the topic that's before us today. That some of the other speakers who are who've been at this podium today are, and their expertise is not limited to knowing more of the facts about this drone program. It's also expertise in the sense of actually living with the impacts of what these drones are going to mean for communities. So even as informed as like the white members of this commission are, you will never be able to understand that level of expertise. With that disclaimer made, I just want to comment on some of the things that I've heard up here today. Deputy Chief Frank described the process of getting these drone decisions made as a stringent process, and then to back that up, described how the decision kept getting handed up the chain of command, but all within the LAPD. That's the concern, is that it's all, yes, there's many steps along the way, but it's all within this same body. So some kind of external accountability, again, I don't have expertise, but when I hear that sitting in the room today, I just think, well, that doesn't even speak to it, because the concern is about the decisions LAPD is making. So if it just keeps going higher in LAPD, then that doesn't fit the definition of a stringent process. Chief Frank didn't know about costs when asked about that. He didn't know about the new craft when asked about that. Chief Moore had to intervene and say, actually, we do have a new craft. It doesn't inspire confidence in the ability of this body to run this program properly. Chief Moore, why don't you just say yes when Commissioner Bonner asks you if you're going to try to do your best to be on the vanguard of committing to best practices as being on the vanguard? Why does that need to be disclaimed and backed off of? What about the person we heard about before who's responsible for making decisions about drones and has a personal financial stake in these drone programs? We haven't heard more about that. That seems like a thing to talk about in the room today. Soboroff talked about there's no mission creep. It's clear. Deputy Chief Frank characterized the next steps as, quote, expansion for lack of a better term. I heard it and wrote it down. That's mission creep.
Am I next?
Yes.
Great. So, yeah, kind of going off of what Zach was just finishing saying, I have this movie Boss Baby in my head that the kids like. So speaking of Boss Baby in the middle, talking about mission creep, and just like Jamie raised up, like you have no idea what you're talking about. You're unaffected by this, just like I am. And just like saying, "Oh, there's no mission creep," like you don't know what you're talking about. No one believes you, because we can look at SWAT, what SWAT was invented for. We can look at the helicopters in 1956. He started with one for traffic patrol. In the early 70s, that jumped up to 15. Now you're shooting people out of helicopters and killing them. So you can say, oh, there's not mission creep, but you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. No one trusts you. There is bias, like Jeremy brought up. You have a bias toward the police. That's fine. You admit it. But you can't pretend that you're doing anything about community oversight. I know that Mr. Bonner has recently, at least, I don't know the rest of you, last time you read the definition of what you're supposed to do here, but I know Mr. Bonner has recently read about, community oversight and what that means for this commission. You can roll your eyes, Jimmy Buffett, but you still should listen to me. So, last year there was this period of time where you purported this community outreach where people could send emails and all this stuff. I know the Brown Act, says 72 hours, so we got this agenda on Friday, and now y'all are voting on it today. What kind of community oversight is that? If Chief Moore always talks about community policing, all these motherfuckers talk about community policing. How is it community policing if you don't care what the community thinks and you make it obvious that you don't?
Craig Roberts, followed by T. Guerra.
Yeah. Craig Roberts, Stop LAPD Spying Coalition, Los Angeles Community Action Network, and a member of one of the many communities including the black community, which completely and are unalterably opposed to this bullshit, the drone program. I notice you call this small unmanned aerial systems. Colloquially, they're known as drones. I personally like to refer to them for what they are, future weapons platforms. That's through planned mission creep. Now, Chief Michael Lismore is going to tell you that there is no mission creep. He has actually enumerated the future mission creep of this system, which is coming. Real-time facial recognition, bombings through exploding tear gas canisters. It's all coming down the line. You know, when they put guns on it, they'll start out with non-lethal ammunition. Then they'll go to lethal ammunition. They'll start by observing from the outside, then they'll start flying them into buildings, but in between they'll put on sensors which will penetrate the building to see who's in it so that their killing and their murder can be more precise. That's what this is about. This is about precision policing. That's less collateral damage through more targeted police murders. Okay? That's what this is about. So if you approve the permanent expansion and permanent deployment of this system and the systems which will come along in further iterations of it in the near future, you are merely signing on to mass murder through an acceptable system of police oversight.
So if you followed the fight against police drones in Los Angeles, what you hear and see are many different voices and faces from many different communities and from many different organizations. And that's who you need to be listening to, not to these motherfuckers right here. We hear youth speak out. We've heard communities of color speak out, folks who are undocumented, folks who have been incarcerated, LGBTQIA folks who have now and have always lived in communities that are constantly occupied by police. We've heard from folks who have been houseless and who are currently houseless, and folks who have been in the scenarios that police show us that they are going to be using drones in. And nearly entirely across the board, what people have been saying is absolutely do not do this. That's what communities are saying. They're saying, do not do this. The police do not have the trust of the community. The technology does not have the trust of the community. And what's more, it's completely unnecessary. It's unnecessary, especially when you hear from communities talking about what they actually need in this city. The choice does not come down to, as LAPD would have you believe with their cost analysis, to using drones or using a SWAT armored vehicle and a team of 32 SWAT officers. The choice is not between using a drone or sending in a robot. This is a false premise that they are setting up, because the answer is it doesn't have to come to that. There are ways to de-escalate before it gets to the point of serving that warrant or creating that situation that results in a standoff. If the concern here was truly about reverence for human life or even about cost to the city, then the question would be, what are we doing to listen to neighborhoods, and to invest in neighborhoods to stop it from getting to that point where you're spending thousands and millions and billions of dollars arming the police against communities that they're still not having their most basic needs met. So my question to you all is, what are you doing to stop that escalation of police violence and of police armament? Because that's what we're talking about today. Making a drone program for LA.
Next speaker, please.
The next three speakers, Akili, Audrey George, and Hamid Khan.
Next speaker, please.
That's who you should be listening to, not sharing information about amongst yourselves.
You can come back during public comment, please.
No one gives a shit what you all think about it. You should be listening to the community, and the community
So you're going to come back during public comment?
talking to you about it. No one gives a shit what you think about it, so wrong.
With Black Lives Matter, and this is a classic example of the institution or the people. A classic example. institution says we want this. And so they're going to move to do it. Here is mission creep, terrorism, gang violence. That's how they're going to, that's the pretext and the context they'll use for mission creep. If you listen to what they say most of the time, it's about how do we control gang violence. And there'll be a report today that talks about gang violence, but then that's only 3% of the problem. But that'll be the context for the use and the weaponization of the drone. And they'll talk then about terrorism and how we need to recognize certain people. And in this context, in a society that these people run, black folks and brown folks will be the people who will be identified. That's right. So everything they say now, just like they said when they got the helicopters or the battering rams, or if they can weaponize a pencil, they will. They will weaponize these drones. And in 2 years or a year, we'll be back here and we'll hear a chief or one of them talk about, this is the way we're controlling gang violence. This is the way that we are controlling terrorism. And then the drones will have the weapons. The drones will have the facial recognition. The drones will have all of the internal processes that you talked about. There'll be no reporting. There'll be no monitoring. And they'll be used regularly in my community. Vote no, no drone.
This agenda item is very important to us. We do not consent. Just know that. Don't vote today. Here's an idea. Delay this vote. Hold a public community forum. Get subject matter experts like Stop LAPD Spine Coalition to testify. Bring people in who from impacted communities to testify. Approval does not have to come today. It is not foreseen. You can decide not to do this. Who wants this? Not the public who have weighed in. Sandra, have you ever talked to your constituencies? People who are likely to be impacted by this type of criminalization? Remember Seattle. In Seattle, the people were listened to. The people insisted on being listened to. They denied access to drones. We ended up with their drones. Don't ignore the overwhelming public opposition to this. Do you hold LAPD accountable when this software and technology is still evolving? How will you do that? It's evolving at such a fast rate, even the presenter said. It's a moving target. How are you going to hold them accountable for that kind of thing? I remind you about the concept of before the bullet hits the body. This is like an aerial battering ram. The decision to use drones is automatically an escalation. Just the decision alone. The mindset of cops who have already deciding to use drones have already criminalized suspects, determined that entering their homes is important.
Next speaker.
The next speaker is Hamid Khan. Hamid Khan, followed by Wayne Spindler and Adam Goldsberg.
So in this classic fashion, Dale Bonner, I'm going to just talk to you because the rest are irrelevant here. In this classic fashion, what we see is that every time the LAPD comes to present something, they insist that history begins today. That we have to sit here and listen to this thing and accept and believe this language of stringent guidelines, of protocols, of following up. April 9th, he dismantled the laser program, stringent guidelines, Chronic offender bulletin is discontinued. Protocols are in place. In-car video cameras, 92 out of 300 broken antennas, stringent guidelines. Misclassification of crime reports, 25,000 of those, stringent guidelines. These are the stringent guidelines are to violate the policy. The stringent guidelines are to conspire and to mask everything behind, what they're doing. So you have to really think for a second. Look at the history of this department. Look at the history of what has happened. And then, in those stringent guidelines, what are we looking at? Some guys, a sergeant's friend has developed this technology, right? You're asking what the cost is, $10,000s, millions of dollars? We don't even know that. These are the stringent guidelines. These are the protocols that they're following. And now they mask everything behind, and other speakers have already spoken to that, but I think we have to lift this issue of de-escalation. How do you expect drones to de-escalate? I come from Pakistan. I've been to places where families have been destroyed. My family, extended family, their villages have been destroyed. You should talk to them what de-escalates. You should talk to them the trauma they have. You should talk to them the anxiety they have. You should talk to them the fear they have. This sound is like a boogeyman. This sound makes children run. This sound makes children run under their beddings. And you are going to bring that in where a community that has been devastated because of ghetto work.
Next speaker, please.
The next speaker is Wayne Spindler,
And after that,
followed by Adam Goldberg and Chris Roth.
Say no, that you will not do that. Or we challenge you to have public forums. We challenge you to have
come back during public comment, please.
7 out of 600 approved that. 6%, your own numbers.
Come back during public comment, please. Sir, you can come back during public comment. Your time is over. I'm going to give you a warning. Your time is over. Give up the podium, please. Please stop interrupting the meeting. Thank you.
So, I went last night to the Malibu City Council, home of Steve Solberhoff. So, they give you 3 minutes to speak on every item. They stay till 1 o'clock in the morning to listen to every single voice. See, they care about their community. See, this is where he goes home. See, $14 million for a build-out house.
On topic, will you, Spindler?
Well, it's very much on topic.
Be quiet.
Isn't it very much on topic?
No.
Because you're deciding something where you don't even live. You're not even in the community. You're not even going to be affected by this. What you are, you're a mercantilist. That's what you are. You come from the wealthy. You come here to play and experiment with people as human shields. That's what you do.
Off
That's
topic.
what this is.
Come back during public comment. Next speaker.
This is...
Next speaker. No, you're not. Let him finish.
I asked. Now, you're doing this because you're building stack and pack housing, and what you're going to do is put all the poor into small areas, and then you're going to kill all of them. And this is what you're going to do. You're going to militarize these drones. Okay. So what they're going to do is they're going to shoot the drones down, because you only got 4, and all they got to do is take them out of the air. So use your fucking head, Eileen Decker, terminate this program.
Next speaker, please.
Adam Goldberg, please.
I don't think I can speak more involved than other speakers. I don't think I can speak better because I used the word involved. But I can hopefully be more conciliatory, probably because this has not detrimentally affected my life to the effect of almost everyone in this room. I've been very lucky in that way. But I think it says something that the escalation process is literally opaque. It is just a pile of ink with arrows on it. And I think I can speak, and hopefully some of you are convinced by now, because if that hasn't happened yet, I don't know if I can, but that there is a spiritual dimension to having tools in the toolbox when these tools allow you to look into the backyard of everyone in Los Angeles. There is a tremendous amount of inherent judgment. There's to have the tools, to have a chain of command of people who work for you that say that this is appropriate. I was afraid that was me. Can I have 10 seconds back on the clock? That the spiritual, that there's taking on a mantle that is not limited by fuel costs and helicopter availability, that instantaneously at all hours of the day and soon the night, that any visible space in Los Angeles is the purview of the LAPD without community involvement, without officer involvement or police on the street, that every one of our neighborhoods is going to be on limits, not just to crime, but to judgment. And I hope that we can understand that the more you see us as ants, the more we will become ants for you. And the last topic is, please do not justify these programs by saying, in other cities. I don't live in other cities. I don't vote in other cities. I don't pay taxes in other cities. I care about Los Angeles. We will hold ourselves by the standards of Los Angeles, or perhaps better ones. Thank you.
My name is Chris Roth. I'm with Ground Game Los Angeles. I work alongside LA CAN and the Stop LAPD Spying Commission. This is a situation that is extremely troubling to see. I mean, for the last 4 years, this community has been standing up and saying that we do not want these drones in our skies surveilling our population. Back in 2017, when you did your survey, less than 6% of people even approved of the use of drones. And yet here we are today discussing a permanency of this program that nobody in the community is asking for. When you're talking about how this is not going to lead to a further militarization of the police and of a furthering of violence upon impacted communities, we just don't believe you. We are looking at what the track records in other cities have been, and we see that this is only going to lead in one direction. And that is in a further escalation of militarization. We have been seeing this happen for decades here in Los Angeles, since the 80s, since the 70s, when you first started acquiring military technology and putting it on the ground in impacted communities. Skid Row right now is the most heavily policed community in the entire country, basically, and you're going to be implementing these tools to further that policing and further impact the lives of these communities. This is completely unacceptable, and there has not been nearly enough public discussion about the impacts that these tools are going to have and these policies are going to have. And if you're going to say that there's going to be automatic policies related to the tracking of the use of this technology and the accountability of the footage and the privacy protections, you've got to look at what you're seeing with the track record of in-car cameras and body cam footage and the frequency with which we see it not being available or being disrupted due to technical difficulties. It's just completely unacceptable. Vote no on this. Thank you.
The next three speakers, Mateo Nagasi, Alex Horner, and Reverend Ricci.
Yeah, my name is Mateo Nagasi. I'm with Black Lives Matter Los Angeles, and I support wholeheartedly everything that the Stop LAPD organization has said to you today. They have given you evidence. You need to listen. They've told you about the continued failure of all your surveillance programs, from laser to PredPol to predictive policing. It does not work, and you keep coming back for more. Again, when other cities say no, why is it that LA says yes when the community clearly doesn't want you? We don't want you in our communities. You think we want you flying around for our kids to see, to think it's something cool until you hit them with a rubber bullet? I mean, you talk about the toolkit. right? A toolkit has a wrench, a screwdriver, some nails, a ruler. No. What you have, let's see. The police department. Your toolbox have tanks, helicopters, armored vehicles, assault guns, stun grenades, tear gas, rubber bullets, tasers, trap wires, stingray, and I don't even know what that is, high-definition cameras. So you don't need all this. This is not Iraq. We are not in a combat zone. You training with Israeli soldiers. There needs to be a ban on all this. You need to send all these weapons back. I don't see you surveilling Benedict Canyon, peeking through windows, finding colluded government officials, trying to tank the economy. That has real life effects, not what you're doing.
LAPD sucks too much, over 50% of LA City's budget. Most of that money should go to other sources. No more funds for LAPD and their drones.
Go ahead.
My name is Alex. I'm a mother and a homeowner in Los Angeles, and I'm strongly opposed to the implementation of drones in LAPD. Based on outreach and public comment, you know the overwhelming majority of people in Los Angeles are opposed to LAPD having drones. Last year, the Commission held a special session to review PredPol and predictive policing, and the ACLU echoed what the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition has been saying, that the policies presented by the department are inherently racist and don't make our communities or our officers safer. During public comment, scientists, including PhDs, explained that the methods used by LAPD to assess PredPol data are not scientifically sound or valid. So you were told that the policies that you enforce are racist and that the methods you use to prove their efficacy are invalid. Shouldn't the response to that have been all hands on deck to address and correct it? Why would you consider implementing drones as a permanent part of policing in our city when there's a significant problem with the basic programs you're already using? In interviews, Chief Moore and Commissioner Soborov, you talk about the importance of the relationship between the department and our community, between our officers and the people. I agree with what you say outwardly, and I struggle to reconcile what you say with what you do here. I'm uncomfortable saying it, but Commissioner Soborov, your impressive career in real estate seems like a glaring conflict of interest with the position that you hold. Real estate developers and landlords directly benefit from hyper-policing our poor and minority neighborhoods, and this seems like an egregious conflict of interest to me, sir. Chief, please don't let drones be your legacy. Please at least give us a session outside of regular working hours so more working folks and parents can attend. Give us advance notice so we can schedule around it. Give us the chance to voice our concerns and for you to speak to them. I do believe what you say about the positive impact you want to have on our city. But this isn't it. Please think 10, 20, 30 years into the future. Imagine how this program will morph, how it will distance officers from the communities they serve, and how that will reflect on you. Please don't focus.
I think it's really important that I speak as a U.S. Army veteran, from a U.S. Army veteran perspective. When I moved to Los Angeles immediately triggered my PTSD, because this city is overly policed. It can be mirrored with military very easily. These police officers, they don't even see us as community members. They, like, this nice, woman right here has a camera ready to criminalize us. You're right? And now to hear that these police officers are getting drones, already had drones, further carries the notion about mission creep. And pretty soon, you all are going to be requesting an ambassador from the community in order to even hear what the community has to say. Because for far too long, you have been killing folks in the community, overly policing them. Chief Moore, I sit on the Voices of Neighborhood Council. Chief Moore came to the Voices of Neighborhood Council and said, we're going to put cameras in all of your public parks so that we can continue to keep eyes on your neighborhood council, on your neighborhood. Did he bring that up today? No. Did he talk about when he came to the Baptist Ministers Conference and said he's going to put all the resources of the LAPD into South LA? Did he talk about that? No. That's mission creep. What's not being said. And then the bodies hit the floor. But we built this on a context of peace and freedom and all this bullshit lies. This place is a war zone. And you need to start thinking interdepartmentally. What does it mean for a $95 an hour drone versus $95 an hour for someone to go to college?
We have no other cards on this item, sir. We have no other cards on this item.
I'm sorry?
We have no other cards on this item.
Thanks. I'll make a motion for approval of item number 2C.
I think just a couple of clarifications because.
program would be predatory, like for the community.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we're clear on what we're voting on, because there's two things at least that I know of that'll be coming back before us. So we're, as I understand it, basically asking you to come back with the special order that the chief is committed to bringing back for us. So we're that's the one ask, and the other, of course, you're going to bring back the donation on the technology. So I just want to make sure we're all clear as to really what we're voting on today, which is I don't understand to be a prophylactic approval of anything and everything. We're asking you basically to come back with a proposed policy that's going to be reflected in the special order that we'll be considering.
Which is the department's report. Okay, do we have a second?
That everyone's understanding, or?
Yeah.
So that would be my motion if that's...
Well, we're approving the department's report subject to, you want to give a...
Yeah, so the report is
approving.
telling us what happened in the pilot program. We can approve that, yeah. And then the ask is to come back with the proposed special order and the information on the donation.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's what's in the report, right?
So
Commissioners, as a department, what I understand is the motion before you is to review and approve this report, and in addition, that the department will return back to this commission with a proposed special order that articulates the policies, programs, the aspects of the governance, its reporting, its use of the small unmanned aerial system, and also that we will bring back before you should it reach and meet my approval, the acceptance of the donation for the software system to track the usage of this system and the management of its the overhead of the actual day-to-day circumstances, as well as this second replacement aircraft to capitalize on the improved monitoring systems that the Spark currently has as deficiencies to what the new one, the replacement aircraft, will provide. That will also be, at this point, it's envisioned a item of a donation through the Police Foundation for acceptance, and that it's not a budgetary item. But, and that this will all be accomplished within the next 60 to 75 days.
Okay. Mr. Tefak?
Mr. President, I would also recommend that the commission consider in that motion the continuance of the current guidelines of the program so it can operate under the current pilot guidelines until it comes back with the special order that Chief Moore described.
Okay.
And that I think is the key point, because as you've indicated in your report, the current guideline does speak to hazmat and bombs. So there's nothing that we're, by not going further today, we're not prohibiting anybody in that regard. So it really is a matter, I think, of approving the report subject to these additional items that we've asked for, which will give us the opportunity to make a more rigorous review of the underlying policy.
Okay.
Yeah, and was there also going to be an Inspector General report at some point?
So within the pilot program guidelines, as you may see, there are two specific roles designated for the Inspector General's office. Those were to receive the every deployment log for every flight conducted of the drones, and also to receive copies of the monthly reports prepared by the department summarizing those deployments. We have fulfilled that role. We have also inquired as to some of the training that's gone on for the drone operators and observed them in the field. We stand ready to participate in any way that the Commission would like us to going forward.
Thank you. Okay, so we are approving the department's report subject. Will you let me finish, or we'll do it without you in here? It's very simple. We're approving the department's report subject to the items that Commissioner Bonner, the chief, have brought up, and Commissioner Teefank's statement that in the interim, the existing pilot program will continue.
And it's really that last point, I think, is the most important.
Is that correct?
As we leave here today, it's the existing pilot program that's going to continue.
Yeah.
And with regard to the forward-looking policy that I presume is going to be reflected in the special order that's coming back to us, that will be the additional opportunity for us to review the underlying policy and on the potential expansion and permanency of the program.
Okay, so do you want to second the motion?
I'll second that.
Okay. All in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, the vote is 5-0. Okay, let's go to item number 3, the report of the chief. Chief?
Good morning, Commissioners.
Morning. Thank you, gentlemen.
As to significant events and activities in this past week, first I report that there was no categorical use of force, no officer-involved shootings during this period. I'm sorry, I'm trying to speak up. Okay, my apologies. So there were no officer-involved shootings this last week. I did attend, and thanks, Vice President Commissioner Decker was at the recruit graduation, so it was good to see the 36 young men and women join the department as new officers. This last weekend, we also saw a holiday weekend with the celebration of the 4th of July, America's Independence Day. And while there were a decrease...
So I can't continue the meeting this way. So we will, why don't we just adjourn the meeting into closed session? This is an obvious, blatant. We're going to adjourn into closed session. I'm unable to continue.
The Board of Police Commissioners will now recess into closed session to discuss items number 5A1 and 5A2 according to Government Code 54957.
Yeah, he was in rare spirits.
We have.
The Board of Police Commissioners has concluded its work in closed session. We are back in open session. The Executive Director will report out.
As to item 5A1, OIS 049-18, the commission unanimously voted. Tactics, administrative disapproval, 4 detective 2s. Tactical debrief, 2 detective 1s. Drawing and exhibiting in policy, 2 detective 2s, 2 detective 1s. Lethal use of force in policy, 5-0, 1 detective 2, 1 detective 1. As to OIS Animal 050-18, commission voted unanimously. In policy tactics, 1 police officer 2. Drawing and exhibiting in policy, 1 police officer 2. Lethal use of force in policy, 1 police officer 2. And that concludes the report.
A motion for
Motion to adjourn?
adjourn? All in favor? Aye. Meeting adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
Well, good afternoon, everyone.